investment in an apartment house, but it isn't. If you get your money's worth in terms of future earning power over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, you're going to make a good investment, and you can't pick them from day to day. If you can do that, you can, well, I haven't met anybody yet that knows how to do it.
You made a point of that in the letter this year, where you highlighted a book that was written by Edgar Lawrence Smith back in 1924, and you said until he came along, nobody really realized the compound interest effect of buying stocks, not just buying businesses, but buying stocks themselves.
Edgar Lawrence Smith changed the world with that book, and people have forgotten all about it now. Although in the 1920s it became more and more gospel as the boom went on. But Edgar Lawrence Smith set out to write a book on bonds versus stocks. And he said he went in with the idea that bonds would be a better investment in times of deflation and stocks would be a better investment in times of inflation. And the first line of his book was to say that he'd been wrong. But he had enough sense to look at this evidence on it. I think Darwin said if you found evidence that was contrary to what you already believed, write it down in 30 minutes or you're blank in your mind and you're blank it out. I mean, people have a great resistance to new evidence. And he said if a stock yields 4% and a bond yields 4%, which is what he was talking about then, the stock was going to outperform the bonds because there were retained earnings that were building beyond that yield. And that has been true for a long, long time, but nobody paid any attention to it. We don't get rich on our dividends that we receive, although we're happy to receive them. We get rich on the fact that the retained earnings are used to build new earning power, repurchase shares, which increases your ownership in the company. And Berkshire has retained earnings ever since we started. That's the only reason Berkshire's worth a lot more, is we retain earnings.
That led Keynes to actually say that this was an important book. People paid attention to it, but you're right, it added to the frenzy that built up to 1929.
Well, that is true, because you can get, like old boss Ben Graham told me very early on, you get more trouble with a good idea than a bad idea, because the good idea works. I mean, it's a good idea to buy a home, for example, and then people go crazy. The good idea works, and it works, and it works. Stocks work out better than bonds most of the time, and after a while, people forget that there were some other limiting conditions. With Edgar Lawrence Smith's book, it was that when bonds yield the same as stocks, which was the case then, the stocks are going to outperform because they have this retained earnings. So stocks started going up in the 20s, and all of a sudden they were selling at 5 or 6 times the prices as when they bought the book. And the original correct perception on his part had experienced changing conditions, but people just looked. They got their confirmation through stock prices, and that's what happens in bull markets. People start out thinking stocks are cheap, and then they start thinking stocks are going up. And a stock can be a good buy or a bad buy. A bond can be a good buy or a bad buy. It depends on price.
But that leads us to today. I mean, if his premise was that stocks are always going to be a better investment than bonds, that's kind of what you hear today, which we've been hearing for a while, is, Tina, there is no alternative, right? You have to buy stocks because bond yields are so low, because interest rates are so low.
Well, if you look at the present situation, we've talked about this before, that you get more for your money in stocks than bonds. That doesn't have to be the case. But it's usually been the case in America, very usually been the case. And if you buy a 30-year bond today with yield 2%, you're paying 50 times earnings for an investment where the earnings can't go up for 30 years. Now, somebody said, I'm going to sell you a stock with 50 times earnings, the earnings can't go up for 30 years. You say, that doesn't sound very good. Stocks are way better than 30-year bond. I mean, that's clear, and that's one of the alternatives people have. People really have 3 basic alternatives: short-term cash, which is an option of doing something later on, long-term bonds or long-term stocks. And stocks are cheaper than bonds.
Charlie said recently, Charlie Munger, vice chairman at Berkshire Hathaway, had his daily journal meeting just a couple of weeks ago. And at that meeting, he said that there's a lot of wretched excess out there and that there's a lot of trouble coming as a result. Do you agree with that?
There's always trouble coming. Yeah, there was trouble coming in 1942 when I bought that first stock, all kinds of trouble. The Philippines were going to fall pretty soon. There's all kinds of trouble in 1949. There was trouble, certainly trouble in 2008. When I wrote an article for the New York Times, I said trouble is coming, but I said buy stocks.
Would you repeat that this time? If trouble's coming, would you still say buy stocks right now?
I would say buy stocks if you get enough for your money. And, we buy a few stocks, but we don't look at, we're not buying the stock market. We're saying, I am buying, let's say American Express, we own American Express, 815 million shares out.